The Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Thank you for joining us. I want to welcome our listeners from the Jackson metro area and the Mississippi Delta, along with the Mississippi Gulf Coast, as we continue to celebrate so many incredible people who are working so hard in the trenches to make Mississippi such a very, very special place to live, work, and play. Listen, I get an electronic history book every morning. I have, as a former publisher of newspapers and media companies, you can imagine that I do a lot of reading. So I usually get up real early, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and read tons of stuff. And I love that. I love my morning time because it's a chance to learn, and I go down rabbit holes, and it's just fun. It's really cool. And this little electronic history book that I get, it tells me important moments on this day in history, and it gives you the chance to look back. And like one of the things that it pointed out is the Hubble Space Telescope had a kind of a ragged beginning, but ultimately became very important to space exploration. First launched in 1990. It seems like in some ways it was yesterday, in other ways a long, long time ago, and it was a long time ago. I saw where Barbara Streisand was born back in 1942, and this brought me to this quote of hers that I think is really important. And people talk about egos, that people have big egos. I used to say it this way, that people have healthy egos. Like, for example, the people who were involved in the Hubble Space Telescope, do you think they had big egos or healthy egos? I bet a mix of both. But what she said is this is what Barbara Streisand said about it. To have ego means to believe in your own strength. You know what your strengths are. And I think that's what I would say is a healthy ego. That is for sure. But yeah, just kind of food for thought, something to think about. Ego is actually an important part of our overall demeanor, and it helps us be successful at the end of the day. And someone who I really enjoy talking about entrepreneurship and about confidence is my friend Mark Henderson. He is now the Chief Technology Officer with Ocean Aero. For people who don't know what Ocean Aero is, we'll tell you in a second more about it, but they make autonomous robots for the ocean, do a lot of data collection. That's a big part of it. They do mapping the bottom of the oceans. They do a lot of stuff. But these are really fascinating machines that they're making. We're going to talk a lot about Ocean Aero in this conversation, but we're also going to remind you where Mark came from before we get too far along. But before we go any further, let me welcome Mark Henderson back to the Ricky Matthews Show. How you doing, Mark?
I'm living my best life, Ricky. How about you?
I'm doing fine. Hey, so heard you smile when I said to have an ego means to believe in your own strengths. You got to know what your weaknesses are too, don't you, buddy?
So I heard it a little different along the way, right? Is that a man's greatest strength is his ego. It's also his greatest weakness.
Isn't that true? Right? I actually think you're right about that.
You got to be there, right? You got to believe in yourself. You got to believe that the path that you're doing, right? I mean, if you're doing things that have never been done before, if you're heading a direction that no one's ever headed, you got to believe.
Yeah.
There's only one way to do that. But if you don't want to be Icarus either, right? You don't want to fly too close to the sun. And so it's real hard.
You and your wife, Leslie, had the first brewery company in Mississippi, Magnolia Brewing. And if you go back, which we won't do now, but if you go back through the history of Magnolia Brewing that you sold not too long ago, but you go back to that history, the story of overcoming adversity, Katrina hitting and then, of course, the pandemic and needing to constantly retool the competition in microbreweries all over the United States. You learned a lot about how not to get too big ahead, because entrepreneurship will fix that pretty quickly, won't it?
It will. It's when we started the brewery, actually, one of the things that I did is actually went and interviewed a lot of people that had been in the beer business or were in the beer business, right? And I talked to people that I consider to be successful and people that I talked to that I considered to have failed and flamed out along the way. And it was really, really interesting to me is that the people who were successful all said the same things. They said, we didn't plan well enough for success. And they said it in a million different ways, but they said exactly that. And most of them wouldn't even use those words. And it was like, that's kind of interesting. And the guys that failed always flamed out because they had the best offense. And they played this game and they had the best location and they had the best brewer or they had the best whatever it was. But the people who were successful played defense. And that's you don't get to pick the adversity that's headed your way. And, as soon as you overreach, you are one small, right, insignificant little detail away from flaming out. And if you play defense all the time, you protect yourself from that.
Yeah, entrepreneurship will humble you. Somebody said to me when I was working on my MBA, one of my professors said, the day you arrive, the day you think you've arrived is the day you start going backwards rapidly. But,
Yeah.
in entrepreneurship, you really never arrive, do you?
No, you can't. I mean, it's a difference between building a business and then managing a business, right? People who are entrepreneurs, they don't manage businesses, right? They dread the day-to-day, the rote kind of, just managing the system. We want to build things. And that's what I've always loved is I became an engineer because I love to build things. I became an entrepreneur because I love to build things. It is no different. And so it's really about building.
I remember I have so many stories I could tell about that. But when I was president of NOLA Media Group in New Orleans, and we were dramatically growing digital revenue, and we had a meeting one morning and said, man, our year-over-year numbers are terrific and things are moving in the right direction. We've got all this in our pipeline, and boy, it was just incredible. Well, on that same morning, a story appeared at NOLA.com and in the Times-Picayune that made one of our biggest customers upset. It was a car dealer with multiple car dealerships. And he pulled, in that moment of like being mad, $900,000 worth of revenue. He canceled all of his digital advertising in one fell swoop. We eventually got a lot of it back, but can you imagine? You think you're on top of the world, your year-over-year numbers are incredible, and then suddenly you lose $1 million worth of business because of one story.
Yeah.
But that's the world we live in, man. I mean, you could be one competitor away, one major mistake away. I mean, these come in so many different forms, don't they? These surprises.
They do. They hit every day in a million different ways, and we get to judge. We can stand back and we can judge entrepreneurs and business people and say, hey, look, they're doing a terrible job of juggling that yellow ball. And the reality is that as an entrepreneur, you only get credit for juggling all the balls.
Yeah.
Right. You let one of them fall and it's all over with. You lose your entire life savings. You lose everything you've worked for, and it can happen in the blink of an eye. One mistake. It may not even be your mistake. It could be an employee's mistake. It could be something that just got slipped through the cracks in a million different ways, and it can be all taken away from you just like that.
Well, you're a fascinating guy, as I remember so well our previous conversations about your track to where you are today as the Chief Technology Officer for Ocean Aero, which we'll be talking more about here in just a second. But what always fascinated me about you was that you're sort of a right brain person and a left brain person, like inside the same brain, because he's a super creative guy. There's an artist side of Mark Henderson, a designer kind of, again, artist side of him, very creative. But then there's an engineer side to him, a very science and math guy. He developed a company called Log Linear Group, and they have very sophisticated radar technology patents that he's developed. But how is it working these days, coexisting in the same brain, this right brain side of you and this left brain side of you? How's that working today?
My wife would tell you it's a lot more challenging than I feel like it is.
I bet so. Are you still painting, or how's that going?
So I don't have much time for painting at the moment, which is obviously my love, right? So at some point I'll get to return back to that and a little bit more. But I'm raising a couple of kids. I got a couple of beautiful children. I've got Ocean Aero is taking up a lot of time. But you talk about that difference between left and right brain, and over the years I developed this kind of concept, which is that a good engineer would give you what you ask for. Right? You tell them what you want, they give you what you ask for. A great engineer gives you not what you asked for, but what you wanted.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
they dig down that little bit deeper and go, no, this is not you. Steve Jobs said it as good as anybody ever did. He said, people can only describe what they want in by way of other things that they have already seen. What you need is an artist to show up and reimagine the world. in ways that no one has ever imagined. And then, out pops the iPhone. And everybody's like, what am I going to do with this? Well, I don't need a big old screen on my phone. And you're like, now can you imagine the world without a big old screen on your phone?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
In fact, you took your thought right out of my mind, because when you started talking about that, I immediately thought of Steve Jobs. I was a big student of his for many years. I read everything that was been written about him. But, this dynamic of understanding the functionality of something and developing new ways to think about functionality within the realm of engineering and design and architecture. I mean, he revolutionized it. And to think that the iPhone wasn't introduced until 2007, that's amazing to me. And how many billions of units there are around the world these days. It's an amazing story. Hey, when we come back on the other side, we'll talk about the work that he was doing with Log Linear Group, how that intersected with this company in San Diego called Ocean Aero that is now located at the port of Gulfport in Gulfport. And we'll talk about, the evolution of that relationship. We'll see you after this with Mark Henderson. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizen Bank studio. I have Mark Henderson with us today. He works with Ocean Aero. He's the Chief Technology Officer. Ocean Aero is a company that located in coastal Mississippi at the port of Gulfport. It's a really interesting company. They make autonomous robots essentially for the ocean, and they can be above the ocean or below the ocean. And it's an interesting thing that they've developed that has multiple capabilities, whether it be commercial or defense oriented. We'll get into all that here in just a second. But Mark, so people can understand this company Log Linear Group that you developed and some of the sophisticated radar technology that you were doing. Tell them about what that company was all about, and then how it intersected with Ocean Aero, and then kind of take us on the journey that brought you back here. You sell your brewery company, Magnolia Brewery, and then end up becoming Chief Technology Officer. It's just another major point that it's a small world, isn't it?
It's so shockingly small, right? And you never know where it's going to lead. One of the things I learned as an entrepreneur was to say yes. So engineers so often, there are people that don't belong in business. Accountants don't belong in business. Attorneys don't belong in business. Engineers don't belong in business, and that's because all of us can, in a variety of ways, evaluate the risk. We know all the ways that it can go wrong because that's what we study, right? How is the tax man going to get you? How is liability going to catch up with you, right? And why is it that what you're trying to do cannot be done? But entrepreneurship teaches you very much that you have to at some point go, let's go along for the ride. Let's see where it goes. And if any of us knew just how difficult the journey was going to be, we would never do it. Right? You got to go in with that youth and that enthusiasm and then see where it's going to take you. And so LLG was one of those things. I had this crazy idea. I read a bunch of papers like you. I start every day about 4:30 in the morning and I read for somewhere between 1 and 2 hours and just catching up on all the things. But I'd read this interesting paper that came out of University of Kansas, and the guy said, hey, look, I got a radar and I can see something in the air and I don't know what it is. And eventually, over many years, and he said, hey, I think they're micro insects. I didn't believe that, but sat down on the path and eventually built a purpose-built radar for looking at the frequencies he was working at and looking for those kinds of targets. And we basically found in the convective boundary layer up to several kilometers, the air is absolutely full of teeny tiny little targets. And we could track the winds. I've been doing some work with the Air Force on how to do precision airdrop. And so there was a customer there that needed to know what the winds were. And I said, hey, I got this great idea for a radar that can see the wind. And I got, no lie, laughed out of a conference. There were 150 people in a room, right? A guy stood up and said, there's only two ways to solve this problem. It'd be LiDAR and radar. And we know LiDAR doesn't work in the fog and the smoke and the clouds and all that kind of stuff. And he said, radar can't see the wind. And I got to stand up 30 minutes later and say, I hate to ruin his argument, but I have data. And I showed up with data and showed, this, tornado of activity in the convective boundary layer, and people just lost their minds and said that, you have no idea what you're doing. That's all noise. And eventually AFRL proved us right. The Air Force Research Lab put us up against the best technology on the planet and said, "You're the best." And it was a great experience. And we ended up selling those patents and doing some great work. And then I was kind of in between gigs and looking for some new things, and had a friend reach out to me and say, "Hey, look, could you come out to San Diego and help us out? You've got all the right experience for doing the electronics for what I'm working on right now, and your wind profiling work applies to the fact that this is a sailboat, and let's see where it goes." And so I went out to San Diego, and we recruited them and brought them back to Gulfport. Wow. And so Ocean Aero is here, just like that.
You make it sound so simple. But Ocean Aero is a really dynamic company. And what's interesting in studying and preparing for this discussion today, I was reminded about how much R&D happened over so many years to get to the point of creating this self-supporting, again, robot on the water. I mean, it can sail, it can go underneath the water. It's important because I think 200 meters is about the how far it can go underwater based on what I read. But it can hide if it needs to. Like, you think about some of the oceans around the world. Some of them, you've got pirates and all kinds of interesting characters out there, and to have a unit that can literally go under the water to evade these guys is really important. So why don't you kind of give us a sense of Ocean Aero? What's the elevator speech on Ocean Aero, and what role does this incredible device play in proving the mission of this organization?
Yeah, so there's a couple of pieces to that. One is in the future, robots are the future, right? And you and I can talk about universal basic income and a million other things that might show up with a world that is ruled by robots. But at some point in the not so distant future, Ricky, our labor no longer has value. Right, our ability to move rocks and dig ditches and things like that, it's not going to be something that humans do. And if you look at 2/3 of the planet is water, right? And depending on who you ask, right, what that percentage might be, but it's a lot, and it's a big unknown. We've mapped more of Mars than we have of the ocean bottoms.
Wow.
Which is crazy to think about, right? And we know what Mars looks like. We know all of that stuff. And so, building these autonomous robots, and you go, hey, look, how do we do this? How do we put robots out in the ocean, a very inhospitable environment for long periods of time? And you go, well, they need to be solar powered. They've got to be able to, consume the energy that's available in the environment. And so what we did is we developed a boat that is part sailboat. It's part electric boat. It's part solar collection platform. It's part submarine. So the world's 6th largest submarine fleet is actually owned by Ocean Aero in Gulfport, Mississippi.
Is that something to say, isn't it?
It's crazy. It's crazy to think about, right? And so we've got these boats off the port of Gulfport. They're out in the water just about every day. We're attaching all kinds of new sensors to them on a regular basis. Everything from side scan sonars to multi-beam bathymetry for doing pipeline inspection. There's just like a million things. And the ocean is a crazy place. The diving piece, obviously has application to sensing the bottom, right? Gets you closer to the action. But to your point, right, is that how do you get away from bad stuff on the surface? And that bad stuff can be weather, it can be people. Right? It can be machines, and you don't want to get run over by a boat, and you don't want to get absconded with by pirates, and you don't want to take a Cat 5 hurricane right in the face. And so getting off the surface energy, you get 10 meters down below the bottom or below the surface, and any submariners that might be in your listening audience would know it's a really easy ride down under the waves. It's the battleships that get beat up.
So all this R&D over so many years leads to this autonomous vehicle called the Triton. And, it's interesting looking back, like, for example, your team. You've got a strong team. We can talk about who's on your team. And then I see also a board of directors that's very diverse, interesting in terms of scientific and technology contributions. And then I see a board of advisors that are heavy in the defense industry. It's clear that the applications, when you start to break all this down, that the applications are very significant from a defense point of view. I'm saying military point of view, and it's very significant from the commercial point of view, and not just the energy sector, but it could go beyond that. When you start to think about what the possibilities are in terms of market share and market capability and market opportunity, it seems rather significant to me.
Yes. I mean, we like to think so. And I'll tell you from a personal standpoint, right, is that, I've been very lucky, much like you, to have been reasonably successful in my life, right? And I get to pick my battles now, right? And when Ocean Aero came around, I actually interviewed them for, the better part of a year to see if I actually bought into really the vision and believed that the market was there and all the pieces. And I came to the conclusion that I thought so, is that, about half the business at Ocean Aero is defense related. About a third of it is energy, oil, gas, wind farms, those kinds of things. And then about the last, little bit there is just the science, working with, universities like USM and things of that nature and their, coastal data collection platforms and finding out where, the Mississippi River is spilling off into the ocean and creating dead zones. We've got a boat now that we've got just a variety of sensors. We can send it from Gulfport here, sail to the mouth of the Mississippi, which is actually quite some distance away, right?
Yeah.
Collect a bunch of data, collect water samples, and then come back home and we can analyze them.
It's amazing stuff. Ocean Aero right there in the port of Gulfport. We're going to continue to break it all down. I want to talk specifically about this robot on the ocean called a Triton. How did they decide that this was going to be the design? It's a very unique looking thing with these big solar panels on it, et cetera. We'll continue our conversation with Chief Technology Officer and my friend Mark Henderson after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. If you're not in coastal Mississippi, or maybe you are in coastal Mississippi, and you don't hear the term blue economy and understand really what it means, well, it means a lot. It means anything really to do with economic possibility related to oceans and the water, but mostly it's an ocean-derived thing. And I would say if there were a poster child for the blue economy, it's Ocean Aero in Gulfport. This company is incredibly dynamic. It's very innovative. And it has submarines. He just heard him say it's got what? How did you say it in terms of this staking the claim for the largest number of submarines?
Sixth largest fleet of submarines in the world.
Yeah, and they're literally deployed all around the world. Now, look, if you look at a picture of one of them, if you look at the right angle, it kind of looks like the sub that you would think that you would see. Okay, but it has solar panels on the top of it. So that's not something you would expect to see on a sub immediately. But when you see it on the surface of the water, it's odd looking. You don't know what the heck it is. And again, it's unmanned. So it's this autonomous unit that's designed to go do whatever its mission is. It's programmed in that very specific way. And it is incredibly versatile in what it can accomplish. How many different iterations has this unit, the Triton, gone through in, say, the last 5 years even?
It's kind of interesting is that I'm not allowed to say this number, but we are working on version 15.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, so, and it kind of speaks to the speed of iteration. Right. Yeah. So when you're in an entrepreneurial kind of situation, right? I mean, we legitimately are building this business up from nothing. People, 10 years ago didn't know that they needed autonomous boat submarines. And so you've got to build the market along with building the device, right? And you're really trying to work through and figure out exactly where the market is. What is it that people need and are willing to pay for?
It strikes me that Elon Musk would be a really good partner to have. I wonder if there's any conversations with someone like him.
I've never met him, not yet. It's on my to-do list. He gets a little bit of a bad rap and deserves some kudos as well. But talk about someone who has, absolutely embraced a vision of what the world he thinks should look like, and then really embraced on how to do that. So I think you and I have talked about this in the past, right? I have a Tesla. I have a Model 3, the cheap one. It's stupid fast. It's more fun to drive than you can shake a stick at. And now I don't even have to drive it.
Yeah.
The latest update, I can now commute from my house to work. And the only time I touch the wheel is at terminal, right? So when I pull out of the driveway, I click the button on and I'm done. And when I get here, I hit the brake and I drive into a port. It's wild.
I know, very wild. I've had lots of conversations about Elon Musk. Just as I was really focused on Steve Jobs in that moment, I'm equally focused on Elon Musk in this moment because he's transforming multiple industries simultaneously, especially the media industry, because that's an area that I really have enjoyed watching him and what he's done with X and where he's headed with the super app. X is just a part of the overall vision. It's just it's a fascinating thing. But what this strikes me as the kind of project that he would be engaged in, because it seems to be something that could connect. Like, for example, the communication piece has got to be huge. I would say when you're in this far-flung ocean somewhere, a Starlink type connection would be critical to making something like this work.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Oh, see, there you go.
But I'm actively working on a Starlink that can dive.
Yeah.
So no, absolutely. I mean, people have no appreciation for what Starlink really means. And he's actually working right now on trying to get a lower orbit so that you can actually beam it directly to your phone, and you don't even need specialized hardware. And he's demonstrated it at this point. Yeah. You're just like, that is nuts. The fact that the entire world will have access to communication will be transformative in ways that we can only imagine right now. Because you think about, why is Russia engaged in Ukraine, and why is it that they've managed to, successfully do this? And you and I both know is that, the media is a powerful force for, swaying sentiment.
Right, of course, right.
And in Russia, they don't have a free press. One of the few things that's enshrined in our Constitution that we all hold dear, right, is that we have a free press. And, if you've got the ability to communicate with people in that kind of way all across the planet instantaneously, it's super powerful.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've had conversations about it on the air, and I read a lot about it because having come from digital media later in my career, CEO of a digital media company, I get the way these algorithms work. I understand the evolution of social media and how that has become what it is today. I get the huge concerns about TikTok and so on. But you think about, I was, all the discussions around the aid for Ukraine is something that fascinates me, because here's a case where I'm confident, super confident, that Russia and Ukraine maybe collaborated, probably didn't, but they've equally had interest in swaying public opinion away from Ukraine and more toward Putin. How can someone like Putin be normalized in America? It's amazing to me. And the answer is that social media has been a tremendous contributing factor to people thinking that way. And that's what the point that you're making. So in both of those places, you don't have free press in either one of those places, but they have learned to use technology to turn us against ourselves. I mean, you think about what's happening with the Palestinian cause at our universities. I mean, it's crazy, man. Crazy. And a lot of that is this kind of stuff that you and I are talking about.
We do. We talked about it several times along the way, right? And one of the questions that I fundamentally wonder is, can a democracy survive the internet?
Yeah.
And we know that we're having messages that are pushed on us in a variety of ways, and you're like, can we get to the truth? And the construct of the United States was built on this fundamental concept, right? Is that, hey, look, no idea is too profane that it cannot be espoused, right? That we cannot have a conversation about it. And that we will let, normal human beings make their own decisions and come to their own conclusions by having free flow of information. We're putting that to the test.
Yeah,
at a global level. And I think I have hope for humanity, right? I think that we will, in fact, make the right decisions and come to the right conclusions. So
listen, a lot a lot of the conversations that I've listened to recently, podcast related, have talked a lot about things like the Roman Empire, how long they were here, and the demise of the Roman Empire, and why that happened. And when you think about America, good Lord, we're babies, man. We're still infants in the context of time. And you think about, the Industrial Revolution, and now the digital revolution as it relates to technology and how fast that's changing, and it's exponential. It's exponential at a rate that you can, because you're in the business, but the exponential nature of it is so dramatic. It's going to speed up success. It's going to speed up demise. And so a lot of folks, are saying, look, America, at the end of the day, the United States as we know it is an experiment. It's an experiment that in the context of time, we barely even cut the umbilical cord. So don't assume it's always going to be here, because that's not the way it works.
It's not, and we have to defend it every day, right? Yeah. This experiment has generated, and there's shortcomings of any and all of these things, right? But the United States has pulled more people out of poverty faster than any society has ever done so.
Yeah.
And there's a good question in my mind these days. The Chinese have embraced aspects of capitalism and aspects of authoritarianism. And the question is their experiment going to be better or worse than ours? And, I think so long as the world continues to support their monetary policy and the fact that they have not let their currency float, it's going to be hard. And I think they're starting to see that. They've overbuilt. You've seen that in the news recently, and just, the geopolitical aspects of both their corruption that is starting to show up. And that's always been the case, right? The idea is that communism as a planned society, right, will fall under at some point it implodes.
Yeah.
You've got to have the free will component, but we're going to see.
Yeah, we're going to see. I still think, as imperfect as it may be, the United States democratic process, the free enterprise system, entrepreneurship in the economy, and everything else you want to say about it, while not perfect, it is by far the best in the world, and they envy the hell out of us for all the reasons that you and I know. But listen, when you're in the business like Ocean Aero, that's doing this sophisticated technology development like the Triton, and you have these submarines, autonomous, ships, and I don't know, you don't call it a ship, obviously, but this thing that floats and is a submarine. All over the world. We'll talk about where they're deployed today. You have to be aware of what's developing in China and what's developing in Russia and what's developing wherever, and because technology development is a global discussion. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Mark Henderson from Ocean Aero. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. Again, I really appreciate our listeners from the Jackson metro area and the Mississippi Delta and the Gulf Coast all together on Thursdays here on the Ricky Matthews Show. And listen, I've enjoyed, we were chatting during the break, but when Mark Henderson joins my show, we never know where it's going to go, because he spends a lot of time reading and studying. I spend a lot of time reading and studying. I respect the heck out of what he's bringing to the conversation as the Chief Technology Officer for Ocean Aero and the work that they're doing literally around the world. I mean, it's an amazing thing. It's, again, the poster child for the blue economy in coastal Mississippi right here out of the port of Gulfport. And Mark Henderson's kind of in his element working with that team there. Mark, where do you guys have these Triton autonomous units around the world right now?
Legitimately everywhere. So we've got some boats in Korea. We've got boats in the Middle East. We've got boats in Africa. We've got boats in Europe. And so I've joked about this, right? But I think we've got like the 6th or 7th largest submarine fleet in the world, and which sounds really impressive. But like Russia, I think China actually these days has the largest, I think like 67 or something submarines, right? And so right now we're running a fleet of about 20 Tritons across the planet.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. I would think that let's take the applications on the defense side. And by the way, when you were with Log Linear Group and you developed this sophisticated radar technology, it had a huge military application to it. But it would seem that this particular autonomous unit would have a significant military component to it. And it's probably areas of the way it's being used that you can't even talk about. Is that true?
Yes. I can neither confirm nor deny that, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah. The platform itself is like a truck. And that's really where we've put a lot of our effort in, is to say, look, it should be like the F-150 of the seas. You tell me what you want to put on it, and we'll plug it up, and it can take it there.
Yeah.
And the fact that it harvests energy by sail power means that you catch trade winds and you can go across the Atlantic Ocean, and it just would not be a big deal. And then when you start working in closer quarters,
can it handle a payload?
It does. Yep. And it so the total displacement of the boat, for those of you that know boat stuff, the total displacement of the boat's about 2,000 pounds. So if you sink it, it displaces about 2,000 pounds of water. And you can generally carry maybe 10% of that, depending on exactly the payload and how you configure it.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. The energy sector, I can really see the energy sector loving this. So
have you ever seen a map of the Gulf of Mexico, the underwater part of the Gulf of Mexico?
Some aspects of it.
The number of oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, for people who want to go look this up, you can find this on charts. It's crazy. Yeah. You have no idea. And, just you think about all the pipelines and all of the lines that are strung across the bottom and how often they need to be inspected and checked. And just recently, there was an oil spill off the coast of California where they had a pipeline that had corroded over time. And they said, hey, look, had this been inspected more frequently, we'd never lost any oil, right? You could have seen the damage over time. And so we're actively working right now on a multi-beam bathymetry unit for doing pipeline inspection for two of the very large oil companies. I can't name them, but we're working on that project right now.
Yeah, when we're out there, what's interesting in the shallower portions of the Gulf of Mexico, because I literally have spent most of my life out there fishing, so I know, or diving, so I know that area really well. During the Obama administration, they took a lot of oil rigs down, and I wish they would have left them and had that what we call the taken the top off of them, let the bottom part down, so that we could have the coral reef and all the other stuff that's with that, and just leave the structure underneath the water. That would have been terrific. But they went in there and blew them up for environmental reasons. They felt best to remove them, but when they blew them up, they killed all these sea creatures and stuff. I mean, it's just amazing to me. But boy, the number of shallow water oil rigs that have been taken out is pretty significant. But still, development continues to happen. And when you see these oil rigs, you realize that most of them are connected by very intricate underwater piping system that go along the floor of the ocean. And whether it's natural gas or whether it's petroleum based, I can only imagine, man. We think about the oil spill that happened here. We're actually very lucky that more of that hasn't happened, because it's a dangerous thing we're doing off our coast.
It is. And it's also kind of interesting to me as well, right? I mean, we talk about the environmentalist aspect, right? And you and I both know that leaving these oil rigs becomes effectively reefs, right? The number of fish and the wildlife that, attaches to those things, right? Sets up its own ecosystem. But there's just, as I got into this, right, we're building an autonomous boat to go out and to sample, oil spills. Well, we found oil is just bubbling out of the ground. The reason that we're there to harvest it is that it's just bubbling out of the ground. And when we put oil rigs there, so long as we're doing so in a real, concerted effort, we're actually doing good for the environment in a lot of ways because we're mitigating the weeps.
Right. The amount of seeping that is taking place is shocking. And
once you see that on satellite video, you're like, holy cow, the seeps are everywhere.
Well, Mark Henderson, we're out of time. From Ocean Aero, Chief Technology. It's been a pleasure to catch up, my friend.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Listen, have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.